Hello.
Hello,
How you doing, Jamie?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for
Good.
inviting me.
No worries. Thought you'd find it interesting.
Yeah, cool. Hey, John.
Hey, Ike, how you doing?
Good, thank
Good.
you. Long time no see.
Yes, yes. Uh, been very busy.
I bet. This sounds very interesting.
Ah,
The open mic, yeah.
yeah, it's really just I don't know, kind of a little bit of what's been going on in the last couple of weeks um and what he knows going on and all that sort of stuff. So and then kind of just a little bit of I don't know, mutual back patting.
Oh, excellent.
In terms of it's a hard job trying to do new things, particularly in the health system. So the purpose of this is to kind of you know um, uh, kind of enact that adage of a problem shared is a problem halved. So it's nice to be able to talk about what's going on and sometimes what's not going on or what barriers you're facing
Yep.
in order to make things better. Um,
Great, awesome.
Hopefully the people that participate kind of have some ideas that can help. So we might give people another minute to join, but it's pretty relaxed, pretty casual, and kind of just as available as a place for people to talk. And we'll make Matthias talk a little bit about his project.
Yes, Matthias.
He won't be allowed to show any slides, so this will be a really interesting test for him a bit later. I might start just with a little bit of news around something that I posted in the Emma maybe yesterday, or might have, yeah, I think it was yesterday, which was around the US military testing kind of spinal, spinal kind of stimulation devices to help people walk. And so basically it directly stimulates the spinal nerves as they come out of the spine, usually below the spinal cord gets severed, and kind of it's implanted under the skin, and they're controlling kind of it through a computer interface. So pretty much you push a button and it starts stimulating the nerves in a walking pattern type model. I thought that's really interesting. It was quite fascinating what some of the limitations were, though. So it's one of those the promise is further on than the technology, and they were saying so you turn it on and it takes a little while for the machine to decide that you're going to walk, and then you kind of have to anticipate stopping and doing different things because it takes time from you telling the machine to do it and it actually taking action. So it's obviously not reflexive, and the human body tends to respond in less than a second to subconscious changes in position requirements, or changes in the surface you're walking on and things like that. And this kind of the way I read it, it seemed to be maybe a second behind. So by the time you realize that the door's closed in front of you, you've walked into the door type problem. And I realized it was kind of the promise is getting ahead of the technology when they're like, oh yes, in the future, you'll be able to just use a voice, use your voice to activate the different kind of movement modes. And I suppose it's not to kind of diminish kind of the achievements that have been made, but it's kind of that really interesting thing of I suppose we need to make progress, but you kind of go, if you're gonna have a system that gets surgically implanted into you, and then the surgical implant people go, oh yeah, but the next version's better. That seems a whole lot worse than some of the ones that might be some of the things that might go on, or maybe it's just as bad as some of the things that go on when you buy a new phone type thing. So it's probably worse, I would imagine. So when you get implanted a thing and next year's one's way better, maybe my phone should be surgically implanted onto my hand, and then I would kind of feel some of the pain. But it's a funny problem. So medical consumerism, yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of pros and cons to that. And then what is it? Planned obsolescence is the other problem. So come in for surgery to get the new version of the thing that we put in you 2 years ago. Like, I'm not sure that's really.
Don't let Apple hear about this.
Yeah.
But
Don't let any of them hear about this.
But as an industrial designer, that's what I'm trying to do, John.
What, optimize for planned obsolescence?
That's right. Okay.
Very good. Hey, so welcome everybody. Mary, did you want to talk to us about any news that you've got or you've seen in this week?
What did I spot? The Korea Institute of Machinery and Materials has created a new smart robot for infectious disease prevention that estimates virus spread in indoor spaces using AI. So the robot is able to map out its own disinfection path in real time through a probability mapping algorithm, and it estimates where viruses are most concentrated based on CCTV of the number of people in an enclosed space and their length of stay. And then it goes around on its calculated path and sprays clean air sterilized by ultraviolet radiation. So I thought that was a bit.
So it doesn't do surface disinfection, just
I think it does that, fumigate seats and air even if people are around. So, which is a bit different to I think some other robots that have been around that. I think what they do is a little bit harmful to humans. So this one's a bit more people friendly.
I'm reminded of that. I'm reminded of that YouTube video where it's the guy dressed as the car seat, and he drives up to in the car seat. The empty car drives up to the McDonald's window, and it looks like there's no one in the car because the guy's dressed as the car seat. I'm imagining someone sitting in a hospital ward pretending to be the bed or pretending to be the chair in the waiting room and getting sprayed by the robot. Sorry, it's just I can see that on YouTube now. I'm just imagining that happening. And then someone complaining that just because I dress as a chair doesn't mean to say that a robot should be squirting me. Anyway.
New adverts.
Yeah. New TV show.
And the other thing was NHS is to launch a new digital platform for patients waiting treatment. And the move is as part of the elective recovery plan to tackle COVID backlogs. So there's a new rollout of a web-based platform called My Plan Care, which is aimed to increase transparency of waiting times and provide support while patients wait for treatment. Because I think, what did I read? A third of on-day cancellations are due to people not being clinically ready for treatment, such as having long-term conditions and high blood pressure, which hasn't been diagnosed or probably managed. So the website's going to give patients and their carers a better understanding to tailor information ahead of planned surgeries and what they need to do, and including like prevention services and making sure that they are fighting fit for surgery to reduce cancellations.
That's quite a British description. Eileen, what did you want to say?
Oh, I was just going to note that Sandra Holsfort in Darren's team's been working with the planned care and system flow people at the ministry, looking at how they manage the backlog, and part of that's like a scheduler broker type platform where people can see what's available in terms of surgery appointment times. So it might be worth flicking it across to her.
Cool. Order.
Yeah, this kind of opens up heaps of things. So there's kind of this interesting question about who gets referred in the first instance, and so what do you have to do in order to be referred? And then there's kind of a conversation about do not attend rates versus whether people are given an appointment at a time and in a place that is suitable for them, and then kind of you get into some really interesting things around people's perception about the risk of surgery. So there's a couple of useful things in there. There's a guy out of Wales called Glyn Elwyn, so Professor Glyn Elwyn. He's done a bunch of stuff on informing people about what's the outcomes of their surgery is going to be like. So lots of people kind of assume, they maybe listen to their surgeon, and their surgeon says, yeah, I'm going to do this surgery, and this is what the surgery's for. And a lot of people compute that into a bunch of outcomes, which is the surgery fixes me, or it makes me better. And he said, when you start to explain to people what the rates of consequences, or side effects, and unintended consequences of surgery are, a lot of people decide that either the surgery isn't worth it, or they'd rather have a conservative treatment plan instead. And so it's kind of this interesting question of how much of a waiting list is made up of people that don't really understand what their surgery's for, but are on kind of the list because that's what the surgeon suggested, and technically they meet the criteria. And then how much that might correlate to people afterwards that have a poor outcome from surgery, possibly purely because their expectations of being cured or everything being resolved weren't actually met. And then if they weren't realistic to start with, you've kind of got this, you're creating yourself a problem, not because you've done a bad job, just because you've kind of delivered something in the way that it's designed to be delivered, and it turns out that that wasn't good. And then the last one is, something that's been really big for a long time and talked about quite a bit, is the ERAS type stuff, which is enhanced recovery after surgery. So there's lots of evidence out of the UK, particularly in this space, and particularly in the elective space, around post-surgical care. So in terms of standardizing and creating pathways around it. So there's lots in this space, and there's lots of opportunities. One of the interesting ones in New Zealand, which kind of goes under the radar a little bit, is some of the clinical triage processes that happen in hospitals. And there's a product called that a number of clinicians / DHBs use in order to do the waitlisting, is called 1,000 Minds. And the basis behind that is kind of the Delphi process. So if you don't know what the Delphi process is, or you don't know what 1,000 Minds is, there's quite a bit on their website that you can go and learn about. And it's kind of a, probably a naughty word in the US, but it's essentially kind of rationing, an economic rationing of services determined by specialists and or consumers' feedback about where the threshold for surgery should be and the prioritization for surgery. So it's quite an interesting concept. And I think it was pioneered here in New Zealand in terms of implementing it for healthcare, but it's certainly one of the things that doesn't really come up on many people's agendas, in terms of, it's not like Pharmac where everyone gets angry about them not funding more medicines. This is kind of just it's a process that sits in the background that people don't really question. So does anyone have any other thoughts about kind of the planned care or the planned surgery or elective surgery kind of process? No? Okay, cool. Excellent. Does anyone else have any news that they want to talk about? Anything exciting that they know has happened? They've read somewhere online? Ross, I'm sure you've read some exciting things.
I haven't read. I was going to say the 1,000 Minds is built into scope as well, so you can use it for surgical triage. There's a lot of wasted, or there seems to be a perception in some DHBs that there's wasted, what do you call it? Pre-admission sessions with surgeons and anaesthetists, because they just kind of they don't necessarily have a process to rate the risk of the patient before they meet them. So basically the first 5 minutes of the meeting is do I actually need to be here? Sorry, my call just froze. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you actually need to be here? Whereas they may not even need a session if they've done some sort of prioritization beforehand, or someone had done some.
Yeah, it's another interesting kind of thing, and that's kind of connected to that, which comes up on a regular basis. So particularly in a procurement context, where everyone talks about, it'd be really good if we had standardization of tooling. So, we'd buy cheaper hip replacements if everyone used the same hip replacement. And so there's, you know, some really interesting stuff in that, which is you talk to the surgeons about it, and essentially the hip replacements themselves, and Michael, you'll know about this, the methods for inserting them are different depending on the type of one that you have. And depending on the type of one you have, the technique, the surgical technique for removing the current hip and putting in the new one is different as well. And then the tools that you use in order to do all of that are then different as well. And so I'm sure there's partly in this, you know, the companies are are almost interested in creating different ones for the purpose of having the difference. But at the same time, I think people misunderstand kind of the ease or the simplicity of, or the interoperability necessarily of both the techniques, the training, and the tools themselves. And so, and then the implants on top of that. So it's kind of quite an interesting thing about, which we've learned in the COVID response. So I was talking to some lab people, and they said they've put in rapid PCRs. And so they put in brand number 1, and that lasted about 3 months. And then they couldn't get, I think, reagents for their PCR, for that PCR machine. And then they put in brand number 2, and then they couldn't get the test kits. So they could get the reagents, but not the test kits. And then they had to go and buy brand number 3, and they're kind of waiting for either the test kits or reagents to become not available. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of that problem of, it's easy to buy things cheap, but if you then can't buy them reliably, you've undercut yourself a little bit. And so we've seen Pharmac in that situation a couple of times as well, which is where, you know, they've gone down a single supply route for medicine, and suddenly that single supply of that medicine is really hard to come by. So it's an interesting thing, you know. Maybe there is a 80-20 rule in this, you know, that Pareto principle, where buying most of them in a standardized way is good, but always leaving the ability to vary it. I don't know what you think about that, Michael. Is that something that kind of you guys run into a little bit?
Yeah, it's always that trade up between, you know, if you go to a single supplier and you put all your eggs in one basket, and then you have supply issues, and we have run into that, then where does that leave you? It leaves you with longer surgery wait times at the other end. So, and also, I suppose, just introducing that variability into the market, sometimes good around discovering, you know, this is a better way of doing it rather than being stuck to the old way. But yeah, it's always a balance between keeping, you know, if you have multiple suppliers, keeping enough, you know, throughput for them as well to make it useful, or keep their supply chain up. It's a balancing act.
Yeah, I think that applies more broadly to technology as well. So we went through a period kind of in the early 2010s where the ministry spent a bunch of time trying to create a single winners in all of the markets. You know, if you want this system, this type of system, so a PAS system, you have to buy this one, or if you want like a portal, you have to buy this one. And I think the risk, obviously, the same risk kind of applies, where, you know, if all of the business goes to this one organization, why would you stay in the New Zealand market? And so that's kind of it's an interesting problem for us, given we're a big industry, but in reality, New Zealand's a small country at the bottom of the world. It's slightly different in places like Ireland, where they're part of the EU. And I spent a bunch of time where they could afford to make reasonably kind of exclusive decisions, because coming back into Ireland, if you'd chosen to leave as an organisation because of, you know, like them granting kind of a single supply or sole supply agreement, wasn't that hard. Whereas coming back into the New Zealand market might be a bit harder for some organisations. So it's an interesting problem. And I think you also really raise a really interesting thing, Michael, around it's not just about today, but it's also about tomorrow, in terms of, well, if we've only got a sole supply agreement for a single type of thing, what happens when the new thing arrives and it's way better? Like, how do you manage bringing in that new thing if you haven't left yourself any room for it? So yeah, it's a fascinating problem. Righty ho. Does anyone else have any news that they want to talk about? Things that have happened in the last couple of weeks that they want to bring up? Scott.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, sorry to disappear there. I got a call. I don't know if it's really the sort of news you're talking about. But news for us is that we've there's a collaboration of a collective of 4 whānau-centred care providers in Northland who just agreed to move onto us. So we're going to be doing true interagency whānau-centred shared care in Northland.
Very good.
Which we're pretty excited about, but that's just sharing. I don't know if that's what you want to hear or not. But
Yeah. And I suppose the question I've got is, why do you think they chose you?
Well, a couple of them were already using us, so they liked that. I mean, they would like what they had. It's the ability to coordinate care of families and the ability to collect data while we're doing it.
Yeah. So separate to being about a person, it's about a family.
Or family and people, but yeah, we've set it up so we have a whānau feature, so we treat families as entities in the system as well in their own right. So it gets quite complicated because you've got individuals as entities and you've got families as entities, and families are made up of individuals and they all have their own rights and sharing and all the joy. So yeah, it's been endless fun, but we've set it up now with sensitive teams so that we can make sure that everyone only sees what they're supposed to see. And part of this is an Oranga Tamariki contract as well, so it's coordinating in with government too.
And how do you manage because this is not a static thing, obviously, this is a dynamic thing. How are you managing the changes in the family groups, if you know what I mean, or the whānau? So people coming in or going out or changing roles and things like that.
Yeah,
Is it you guys having to do that, or are that people able to do that themselves?
Oh, the organisations do it. But yeah, people can get added to whānaus. You can be added to more than one whānau. So if you're a child and you're spread across a few families or 2, then that's fine. It supports that.
Cool. And is that almost like a Teams type availability model? So in Microsoft Teams, you create your own team and then you're the boss of that team, and so your job is to give people access or take their access away if it turns out that you don't want them in your team anymore, type stuff. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So as far as access rules go, yeah, we created a thing that's funny enough ended up being called Teams. There was much debate, and we ended up on Teams. And yeah, we have the way we handle it is we have teams, which is effectively access rights, and then we have roles, and you can be in multiple role groups and multiple teams. And then you work seamlessly within the teams and roles that you have been allocated.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. That's interesting. Hey, I can see you sitting. You've come back, Matthias. Did you want to give us a little bit of a rundown about what you've been working on?
Yeah, sure. I was actually getting a call from the contract managing agency thing.
Very good.
Yeah, sure. So, kia ora, Matthias. I've been working under John for the past 2 months, I guess. And I was working on doing some natural language processing for clinical checks associated with radiology. So effectively what happens now is you go and get an MRI or a CT, the clinician writes up a report, it's unstructured text data, and then by my understanding, that report goes into a data warehouse somewhere to die, which seems like a bit of a waste of a valuable data resource. And so we contracted Microsoft to do a proof of concept. So effectively trying to make that massive resource of radiology associated clinical texts machine readable, so that you can sort of do some querying on the data to figure out some general trends, or just to really understand the data better. And so Microsoft did a proof of concept. It was kind of underwhelming. So they actually only ended up processing about 1,300 texts. For reference, there's 1.1 million of them. And this is just 1 or 2 years worth of data from Auckland District Health Boards. And it's across all of their radiology facilities, so CT, MRI, ultrasound, all sorts of other ones. And they did it on Azure, which is the cloud platform offered by Microsoft. And they used their product called Text Analytics for Health. and it's effectively a black box, and more of a black box than typical machine learning. So, all machine learning algorithms are black boxes, but this is you get what you get from the algorithm. And so we sort of wondered, can we use better developed tools to get a better outcome? And I think the answer is yes. So I used my stack was Azure at the bottom layer, which was the storage of all of the texts, clinical texts. And then I used a platform called Databricks, which is built on this thing called Apache Spark. I'm sorry for the word vomit. I'm going to be using lots of jargon and stuff. I'll try to break it down though. So Databricks built on Apache Spark. Apache Spark is effectively an analytics engine developed by some people out of Stanford for doing big data. So it's become sort of standard in the world of machine learning and data science as a way to manipulate and access massive amounts of text. And when I say massive, we dealt with 1 million records. That's chump change in the world of Apache Spark. And then on top of Databricks, I used a natural language processing library called Spark NLP, which is open source. And then on top of the open source version of Spark NLP is Spark NLP for healthcare, which is maintained and developed by a company called John Snow Labs. John Snow is the guy who first mapped the cholera outbreak in London, I think it was. So it's sort of a play on that. And so Databricks is built on this notebook structure, which is effectively just a really nice development environment. You can sort of write documentation alongside your code, and all of the code is sort of segmented into little blocks. So it's really readable, and it's easily readable. It's easily shareable. It's very repeatable and replicable. Basically, you just give someone else your notebook, and then they can run it on Databricks. And yeah, I managed to get some pretty cool stuff working. I'm actually running some code in the background here right now, just waiting for it to do some stuff. But yeah, managed to I could load in all of the data in less than 2 minutes, like 1,153,000, however many there are, which is ridiculous given that it took Microsoft 3 months to do just 1,300 records. I'm also outputting, so I'm currently working on the feature right now, which is actually just getting all of the entities that the algorithm that I've used has recognized into a large table. And then that table will be made, it will be exposed, which means you can use things like Power BI or Shiny app on top to sort of query the data. So yeah, and I have no background in natural language processing. I do have a programming and maths background, so that helped me a lot. But I think it really speaks to the power of these modern tools, and they are modern, right? Like Databricks is a pretty new company. Apache Spark has only just started taking over, and John Snow Labs itself, I think, is 3 years old. So it really shows the power of modern tools, what they can do if a chump like me can get in and do some really interesting work in a short time span with very little background. Imagine what an expert in the field could do. So I was pretty surprised that I managed to pull something out of the bag, but yeah, really happy that I got to use new tools. I was a bit worried that coming into the ministry, I'd be sitting on legacy systems. John gave me free reign over that sort of stuff, and I've been in conversation with Databricks and John Snow Labs as well, and they've been awesome to work with. So John Snow sent me to a 4-day sort of training program, and now I'll sit a couple of exams and get accredited as like a Spark NLP engineer, which is quite cool. So yeah, chuck that on my CV, put that on my LinkedIn when I make it.
Very good. Nice work, Matthias. I think one of the interesting things for me was kind of that thought that notebooks are starting to come of age. So notebooks have been around for a little while in a data science context, but they've historically had some limitations where they're either a single language or they run locally, and there's a pile of dependencies that exist behind them in terms of the fact that they're running locally. And it's quite cool because essentially Matthias is running the notebook in his browser. So the browser is his IDE, and it does not just Python, which is kind of Matthias's strong point, but when people turn up and they want to write some SQL to go into his notebook, they can do that too. Or if they write Java or R, they can put that into the same notebook. So that to me is kind of quite cool, where that might take us. Where we've just started some work looking at data pipelines. So started literally last week, working on how we get close. And the technical people always get mad at me when I just drop the closer and close-ish words to real-time data from district health boards, so that we can do kind of we can do views of, say, which ED is the busiest right now across the country, or why is my hospital busier than the hospital down the road, or how's our region going in the South Island compared to the North Island. So it's the ability to do that in a close to real-time basis. And so we started that last week, and one of the interesting things is that question of the more kind of heterogeneous the sources, the more people attempted to give us the right answer. So let's fix our answer and give you the right answer, rather than kind of work together to make it kind of to do the standardization together. And I think by doing the standardization together of the data, we end up with a better product, because then everyone understands why the source data is different, and everyone can see why the changes have been made. And so in that, we end up with an output which everyone agrees is right. Because at the moment, often we spend a lot of time here in the ministry, at least, having arguments with district health boards about when we've processed their data, which they've already processed, and the numbers don't come out the same as to who's kind of right and wrong. And so there's lots of backwards and forwards about whether our number's the right number or their number's the right number, or it gets published in the media and suddenly the district health board's ringing the ministry going, hey, that number's wrong, why did you publish that number? And to me, there's got to be some real value in exposing the data, working together in like a common space, and then being able to commonly see what the outputs are. So like I said, that started last week, and there was a workshop this afternoon, which unfortunately I didn't get to because it's running now, and I'm talking to you guys. And hopefully the output of that is some agreement about what it is we're going to output. We're working on data out of the patient admin system and ED data. So hopefully that'll all come together, and then we can start to open up some of the processing of it, kind of in that collaborative fashion. So good news for us.
I think it's interesting, just jumping on the collaborative thing. The notebook structure actually came about as a movement in academia towards repeatability. So
Yeah.
I was looking into how Jupyter came about, and obviously people were very frustrated with they'd do some computational analysis for a paper, and then you'd try and run it on your local machine, it wouldn't work. And so Jupyter was like, we'll build a product, and it worked really well. Now, if you go look at academic articles, they'll often just share a Python notebook as their code.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's kind of really interesting, particularly in healthcare, where meta-analysis and systematic reviews are kind of fundamental to us deciding that there's sufficient evidence to trust something. So it's kind of quite an interesting development, and one which is, I'll call it cutting edge. I mean, for you, Matthias, presumably notebooks were a thing throughout kind of your training at university, and it's kind of funny that you might come to the ministry and maybe into the health system, and it's kind of something we're really only just grasping now as something that's potentially highly valuable. Speaking to that comment you made before about legacy systems and things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was surprised that people hadn't heard of it.
Yeah. And so Matthias got dragged into talking to all of our national collections and reporting people this afternoon, and I think you're a bit surprised at just how many people join the call, were you?
Yeah, I thought it'd just be like a team, but it was like there were like 30 people or something. It was really scary. I like was watching people roll in, and I was like, oh no, like stop.
Very good.
No, it was good though. It was good.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, so did anyone else have anything they want to talk about or share in this session? I can talk about something else. Or
I probably just want to highlight that if you're not aware, ACC have opened up their innovation fund. So I can pop a link in the chat if people haven't heard of it. So I think the first round closes at the end of this month.
24th, I think.
Yeah.
Good, yeah. Yeah, indeed. If I kind of roll along the Edgar, you go.
No, sorry. It was a new item after the.
You go. Yeah, you go.
Oh, yeah, cool. I guess from our side, I work for the School of Design at Victoria University, and we're opening a new paper on design for health. That is going to be a undergraduate 300 level paper. So it's the last year of the students' degrees in Bachelor of Design Innovation, and I'm the program lead for interaction design. So we have some very talented students. One of them here in the call, hey Jamie, graduating from that particular program, and now working for the Ministry of Health. So it's exactly the path that we want our students to follow. So Jamie is here as a testament of what we teach, but unfortunately for her, we didn't yet have the Design for Health paper available. We are having new hires, so now we can offer that paper.
Very good. And is that going to focus on CX, UX, and UI type stuff, Edgar, in a digital context, or is it product design, or is it service design, or all of the above? Or
a little bit of all of the above, because being undergraduate still is a bit of a taste of a broad spectrum of what Design for Health can be. So it's open for interaction designers, so web, app, game designers, but also to industrial designers, so some physical devices. So in my research lab, we do both. We normally work with physical devices that have at least some kind of digital interaction to them. So yeah, we're going to kind of translate all the research knowledge that we've been developing over the last 10 years into an undergrad paper first. So that then we work with lots of, in my lab, we have about 8 PhD students and a few master students all doing these kind of projects. So now we have an undergrad paper that can fit into that postgrad pipeline to industry too.
And I'm assuming you have an interface into kind of things like engineering and biotechnology and things like that as well. So for the science side of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's right. And that's one of the questions: how much do designers need to know about the condition to be able to design for it? But I guess one of the main challenges, or not the main challenges, but one of the main things we want to teach is how to talk to clinicians, patients, and engineers, and government as well. It's like, as designers, it's not just about you had a great idea and go and build a prototype. It's more about how do you gather all that knowledge from everybody, clinicians, patients, the actual medical condition and the physical constraints you have, and how do you put all of that together in a new solution. But yeah, a lot of UX. We teach a lot of UX in that particular program. So it's going to be, there's now. That's right, Jamie. So we're having the focus is going to be on that understanding people and UX, and with a big expectation that now most Design for Health practices have of having a co-design approach. So that co-design is going to be quite essential for it.
Yeah. Hey Jamie, question for you, kind of on the basis of what Edgar said. If you had to go back and talk to the people that do this paper this year, what would you like? What would be the oh my God, you're not going to believe this. This is how it actually is, and this is how I thought it was going to be. Like, what would you say? Like, what would you?
Sorry, John, that's not an if you had to come. When
he's pulling me back. Yeah, he's going to put me in for a guest lecture, and I have a feeling that Abby and Margaret are going to do that as well on the service design paper.
Do you want me to jump out of the call now, Jamie, just in case?
Yeah, see ya.
So you can be completely honest. Yeah.
You're sitting behind me. It wouldn't matter. You'd hear me anyway.
I'll go into the kitchen.
No, I think what I found is that being an intern, you obviously come in with a lot of great big ideas of how things could work or how you think they should work, and kind of having that naivety and lack of awareness on how things actually get done within government. Most of the people that I've worked with, they actually find that quite refreshing, because they don't ask the questions because they already kind of had this assumption in their head that it will be shut down for X policy reason or X funding reason. So I just come in and ask questions like, why can't we do it this way? And then sometimes they're like, well, actually we can explore that. But so I think it's just not being afraid to ask what you might think are obvious questions. I won't say stupid questions. I've been told that I'm not allowed to say the word stupid questions. But yeah, the obvious ones.
Yeah. The ones you think maybe they're already an answer to, or an answer you might not like.
Yeah.
So that's that sounds like a lesson for us, not for you. So that's a lesson for us to be open to the naive or the open questions. For you going back, like, is there something that, is there something about kind of working in government that is different to how a designer would solve a problem? Do you know what I mean? Like, and I understand kind of, open questions is definitely a way a designer would think about solving a problem, but are we better or worse than you expected? Do you know what I mean? When you said to your colleague, like to your student mates, I'm going to work for the government, were they like, oh man, they don't know anything about design? Or, is there that sort of thing?
Public sector slug.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. I think definitely get put to a lot more work here than I would if I was going into private sector. Like having this a range of different things that I'm kind of working on has been really good. I think sometimes because of the ministry offers services, and a lot of those services have often been in place for a while, you're almost creating you're looking for you have a solution in mind, and then you're trying to match a problem to it sometimes. Like for example, like the CVDRA thing that Ben and I have been working on. We got brought in kind of late in the piece. They're like, we want to make this PDF printable form that's going to give them a wellness plan. And the first question that Ben and I both asked is like, do you know that the patients want that? Is that useful to them? So we've nearly finished wrapping up a couple of weeks of UX testing with the template that we made. Solution looking for a problem. So yeah, that's kind of been, and what we learn in design, you find what you think is a problem, and then you do some research. This is a process that we followed at university. We got given very broad briefs, so like find a problem that's somewhere in this kind of space, and then go and do some initial research. So you got your like secondary research from like papers, and then you can do some interviews with experts in the field and like your kind of general public, and then find some kind of themes, and then go, right, this is a problem that I've identified. This is some ideas that I have that could fix it, and we're going to test those, iterate on them, and then do some more testing, and then iterate some more, and then here's the kind of final product. So yeah.
Sorry guys, I'm getting a bit emotional here.
Is that an A+ student, is it, Ika? Yeah.
Can I ask two questions?
Yeah.
First one's for Jamie, but also I think it'd be good if others want to jump in here and answer this, and then the second one's probably a little bit more specifically for Jamie and Edgar. But my first one is like, what are some of the most surprising ways that you've actually seen design applied in the public sector? Or like, are there areas that you've actually sort of seen it applied that you would have thought, oh, wouldn't have actually thought that?
I think I think the kind of like graphic design and communication design play a much larger role. Like when I got my hands on like the header style guide, for example, like that's a 50-60 page document of that, but some of, I guess, the processes that they have in place for doing actual user research are massively lacking. With just the Ministry of General, they don't have protocols for example, for paying people for their time if you're doing interviews. Like you have to jump through so many hoops to get your cost codes and to get Prezi cards. So I don't think I find it found it a bit strange that there's a lot of resource in some areas and a lot of thought put into other areas. Like we're big on living our Māori values and those kind of like respect and reciprocity, but we don't have a policy for recruiting people and paying them for their time. So I think, I'm not sure if that kind of answers the question, but yeah.
What about others? What have been some of the, oh sorry John, you might have gone on that. Yeah, like what have sort of others have been like some of the most sort of pleasant surprises they've had with where they've seen design applied? Yeah, so we could say within the health sector, obviously, for this.
I was going to say, Ben, I think the interesting thing about the health sector is, and this kind of relates a little bit to Jamie's story before, which is we're often doing a lot of things that weren't really designed, if that makes sense. And I think to come into that cardiovascular risk assessment space and go, oh, we know it's not working, so we know we've got a problem, but here's what we're already doing. And so therefore they've kind of gone, we know we've got a problem, we're already doing something, and so logically they've jumped to this is how we fix it. I think that happens a lot in the health system. And so that thing of, well, hang on a second, take 2 steps back and go, why are you doing the thing that you're already doing? And therefore, why have you got a problem with the thing that you're already doing? That instantly says, well, it's not just the design of the thing we have to understand. It's kind of that cognitive dissonance that it's not working, and there's some sort of change that has to be put in place. So there's as much about having a good new thing as going from the old and busted to the nice and shiny, or nice and new and shiny, which to me is the interesting thing about the health system, because there's so much which is traditional and cultural, like the doctors wearing ties and trying to get the doctors to not wear ties, has been a real struggle, or to change. Another one is, so there's a really interesting article around, or might even be a book, around changing maternity practice in terms of birthing, particularly in India, due to their maternal mortality rate. And basically it was making all of the midwives wash their hands, and making all of the obstetricians wash their hands when they were delivering babies, because women were getting septicemia. So it's like some of those things are so ingrained in the culture of the health system. Even if you had a good answer, it's not so much about how good the answer is, it's getting people to say, yes, we accept that's, having good timing around it, and then getting people to say, yes, I accept that's a good answer and I'm willing to change. That to me is almost sometimes the hardest bit. And so I was talking to someone this morning, Liz Berryman, who has an app called Channel, and I often talk to people about having good tech's not enough. So you can have a really good product that's, if you use it, it's awesome. But if you haven't kind of swayed the people, and this is an interesting thing for you, Edgar, I think, if you haven't swayed the people that pay for it, which may or may not be the consumer, may or may not be the clinician, and it's bad timing in terms of, the health system always has lots of problems to solve. Even if you've got 2 of the 3, often it's really hard to get stuff done. COVID's very different in that, because we don't have a bunch of pre-built solutions. Everyone's putting time into it, and because of those 2 things, we've kind of got reasonably open slather, like greenfields type stuff. But it's funny, because in that, Ben, you and I were talking about this earlier, it's that problem of almost too much choice, or because no one's done it before, who makes the decision about whether we can do it? And so you've kind of swung it to the other extreme, which is, oh, are we allowed to do this because no one's ever done it before? And so it's a fascinating study in kind of the opposite set of issues. Sorry, I've taken over there with that answer.
So something about your second question, Ben, about the how might we inspire more up-and-coming designers and innovators to be part of the health public sector? Apparently, in our information evenings with parents before they come to university, you know, the high school students want to go to design. They talk to the parents are not very keen because they imagine just graphic design, you know, not a very complex discipline. But once they hear that they can study things like design for health, the parents are like, oh, that makes more sense. You know, that's a useful way to do design. So I think part of it is communicating better what designers can do from our side to the public and to high schools and that kind of thing. And I think Jamie's suggestion of having a grad program, the Summer of Tech, for example, that is common more among engineers, and now is more designers are being part of it. Having more internships, hopefully paid internships in ministries, but also in companies. That is something so much more common in Europe, although they're unpaid in Europe. But we don't really have a culture of internships in New Zealand as much. But yeah, having more pathways to students so that they see, oh yeah, when I finish this, I have a pathway to continue on. That'd be really interesting. But parents want it, that's for sure.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, just on what Michael said. So in our like capstone project for the interaction design like major, we had the opportunity to work with, who do we have? We had TradeMe, we had ClickSuite, we had the police and Wellington City Council, who I worked with, had Xero, and was that it? Was there another one?
I guess the internal Victoria University conflict of resolution.
Yeah. So we had to sign IP agreements and stuff, and we got to work with their teams and get their inputs, and we presented like our projects back to them. But things like that, where you kind of get exposed to what it's like working with real life clients, was, I think everyone in our cohort found it really valuable. And I mean, with the design for health paper, something similar like that would probably be great with either the ministry or somewhere like Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, something like that.
Yeah, I think Edgar, you and Jamie and Ben should have a conversation about kind of how that might work. So I think certainly from a ministry health perspective, we've got different problems to the rest of the health system. But very soon, hopefully, data and digital will be a part of Health NZ, and so Michael's problems will become my problems.
Yay.
I apologise now, John, already.
And Ben was asking as well about any surprises that I have about the public health sector and using design. And one of the ones I remember is when you presented, John, a few years ago, this, was it this, and I don't remember the details, but it was a way to put all of the health information and data from lots of different devices in and create a one and only connection that people could use.
Well, here's the funny thing, Edgar. Guess what? Yep, the government's given us lots of hundreds of millions of dollars to do that thing now.
Awesome.
So, and that's when Jamie was talking about the HERA design framework. That's the design framework for the program which I described to you 4 years ago, I think now, probably.
Yeah.
So things do happen in government. They take a while, particularly for big ideas like that to kind of come to fruition, but it's just starting to ramp up now. So, and I think we might have talked about this, but it's real funny how that type of thinking just influences what we do on a daily basis. So things have changed probably for us quite a bit more in the last 2 years than we would have expected. When we first proposed the plan around HERA, the intent was it would take us 6 years to get 1 million accounts. And when we turned on the My Vaccine Pass last year, we'd been planning the My COVID record to probably only have 500,000 people, which is even in that context. We were planning here to have 1 million accounts over 6 years, and so we've now got 3.5 million accounts in 3 months. And Ross, obviously, you've been a key to getting that delivered. And so you're kind of going, well, that's real different to 6 years and 1 million accounts. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff we now need to do that we thought we had heaps of time to do. Do you know what I mean? Or there's things we can now do that we would never have been able to do if we only had 1 million accounts as well. So it's funny how having kind of that North Star of we should think and solve technology in this way, and then kind of to drive towards it and to try and get funding for it, but have that kind of cascade down in our approach, I think has been really valuable. I don't think I don't think we kind of appreciated necessarily the value in just thinking in that way when we did, but it's great. I tell you what, if we'd fallen into the COVID pandemic and hadn't done some of that thinking, I think it probably would have turned out very different from a digital perspective.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because the example I'd give is Australia built My Health record, and I can't remember the timeline. I think it was something like it took them 4 years to build their digital identity. Ross and the guys built it in about 6 months. You mean? So, and yeah, sure, it's not as full featured as Australia's was after 4 years, but do you know what I mean? It's you kind of go, well, having thought about it for such a long time, or thought about the possibility of it for a while, when it finally get the opportunity to kind of put it in place, there aren't as many surprises.
And we can learn from all the things that went wrong with care data and My Health record as well, which is great.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Eileen, you were going to say something?
No, I was having issues with my buttons. I'm good.
It's just pushing buttons. I like it. Very good. Very good. Does anyone else have anything they want to share or talk about? No. Done for the day. Okay.
You stop
cool.
crying now, Edgar. Or are
I
you
think
not
maybe,
thinking it anymore?
It's interesting hearing the perspective from like design students and stuff, going to university and getting that opportunity to work closely with industry and government, because I come from a science background, and that seems so far away from what my experience was at university. Like the closest hands-on experience was lab work, which obviously, like, if you're going to become a scientist, you need to get in the lab. But I feel like you're so insulated from the realities of actually doing science outside of academia, at least. And so it's interesting to think, what could science degrees learn from design degrees? And I think that there's a lot to be said for, if you could go and work as a lab tech at some like pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, that would be so valuable for a science student to see more possibilities than just being an academic. It turns out that I happen to kind of want to be an academic, but which is lucky for me. But I know a lot of my peers, are thinking, well, what the hell do I do now with a science degree?
Yeah. Maybe it's a New Zealand thing. I know certainly in the UK, there's opportunities for science students to go and do placement semesters working for industry.
Yeah.
Quite often with a job at the end of it as well.
Yeah, and most of my peers had no idea about Summer of Tech. Like, I had just heard about it, but it seems to be something for software students and now design students, and hopefully in the future science students as well. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, this episode sponsored by Science Summer of Tech. Very good. Okay. Well, we might call it quits there, and this time I'll get both of our episodes up. So this will be saved to YouTube and put it up on our Yammer link, so people that weren't here can listen to us have a laugh and talk about things. Thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Awesome.
Thanks,
John.
everyone.
See ya.
Bye.
Yeah.